Okay, so this is what we are going to be making. We're going to create this kind of wall with a skeleton, and we're going to try and keep it as low poly as possible. Okay, so I started doing some research on skulls and how the walls are going to look. Just went through them quickly. And then I started by creating bricks, just a simple shape. I knew it didn't need a lot of resolution because I was gonna chuck this in ZBrush and then add resolution and detail over there. So basically here I'm just creating a kind of tileable set of bricks so that I can copy and paste it and create the whole wall that way. And this footage is twice the speed, so yeah. And I'll be showing you the whole process, kind of with all the mistakes and with everything in there. For the skeleton, I used the skeleton from ZBrush. I mean, there's no need to create everything from scratch. So I just got the skeleton, separated everything, and used the parts that I wanted to keep. And basically from now on, I'm just going to model and move things into place to get the kind of visual that I want to get. Just going through the model and looking for defects that might be a problem later on. So yeah, so most of this is kind of just basic stuff. So I'm just gonna let you just watch it. Maybe I'll put some music on this. And then when something important happens, I'll kind of butt in. So here I'm just trying to set him up as if kind of maybe someone maybe was behind the wall and managed to kind of burst a hole out, and then the rubble kind of fell on him and he got stuck in there until kind of he died. So maybe he was trying to pull himself out of the hole or something. Okay, so here now I'm happy with the bricks and the position of the skeleton, and I'm going to create kind of what's going to be the mortar in between the bricks. So that I'll use to create kind of the concrete, I guess. Okay, and now what I'm doing is I'm grouping everything into groups that I want to work with. So I'm going to have the skeleton parts on their own, the bricks on their own, and the mortar on its own. So I can import them to ZBrush and mess with them each individually. Okay, so we're in ZBrush here, and I'm importing the different elements, and then I'll append them all into one Z tool. Okay, so now I'm subdividing the geometry, so I'll have more stuff to play with. And I'm going to start messing around with the bricks, because they're a bit too even. So this will give it a bit more of a realistic kind of look to it. And I think I spent quite a bit of time doing this as well. So here I'm trying to give depth to the concrete, but it doesn't really work out. So then I try something different later on. Basically, the problem is that the concrete plane is too close to the front of the bricks. So then I kind of push it in backwards and pull everything out again. Yeah, here I just made a duplicate of it by reappending and deleting the messed up one. Now I'm playing around with some masking, trying to find different ways of doing this. And now I'm pretty much trying to cheat and bulge everything out at the same time. But I think even this didn't work properly for me. Okay, here I'm importing some alphas. Just some rock alphas and maybe some crack alphas. And I'm giving some kind of light texture to the bricks and concrete. And over here I'm kind of creating the hole where the skull is gonna be. Oh yeah, okay, so what I did here before is I got the plane for the mortar and the bricks and combined them into one object, so I can modify them both at the same time. The whole reasoning behind it was that I thought I could mask out the creases and I'll have the mortar parts masked out on their own, but it didn't really work out that way. Okay, so now I think I'm trying to turn everything into one object by using Dynamesh. I think that's Dynamesh. So what Dynamesh does, it's going to create a different object but with nothing separate. It's just going to be one big thing. As you may have realized, this takes a while to compute. I may cut this out later, I'll just leave it. Depends what I feel like doing. Oop, there we go. I'm looking at the back, and it kind of got an interesting effect because it looks like maybe somebody tried to plaster the walls, and now I'm just playing around with it, see what I get out of it. But ultimately, I didn't like it, and I think I just undid everything. Yep. Okay, so now I'm gonna move the layer further down. And now I'm gonna go in and kind of start sculpting the mortar. Make it look less even. Okay, and now I'm gonna just start sculpting some rocks that may have fallen on the dead guy, either throughout the years or through some kind of accident or something, God knows. And after I sculpt kind of the base of the rocks, I'll go in with the trim dynamic, and I'll kind of flatten the faces of the rocks. As you can see with the trim dynamic, I can flatten edges according to their tangents. And now I'm just gonna use an alpha to give some detail to the mortar. Okay, so I think here I'm trying to get more resolution to the geometry. Yep. So what I did was I gave it texture at a lower resolution, smoothened it, and then put more texture on top of that. So there's kind of more depth to the texture in the rocks. Okay, here these are some cracks that I created from basically just Google Images. I just kept the cracks and deleted everything else. Now I'm changing texture so I can look at it with a kind of fresh view. And since I've been adding lots of texture, the rocks kind of grew around the fingers. So now I'm just modifying the geometry so that everything kind of fits into place. And now I'm kind of trying to add some kind of scratch marks to imply that he was alive when everything collapsed and he was trying to scratch his way out, or I don't know. Maybe it was frustration, but it's also going to help to sell the reason why the kind of bricks are going inwards. So I'm basically kind of trying to cover up mistakes over here, or mistake rather than mistakes, kind of unforeseen changes. Okay, now here I'm going to try and, I don't know what came over me. I decided that maybe the guy was shot and I was going to put a crack in his skull, but that is obviously a bad idea. And yeah, that was a bad idea. So then I think I just put cracks all over, slight cracks over the skull, and that was enough. Oh, actually, I think here I might I might be decimating the objects. Yeah, so what decimation does is it reduces the amount of geometry but tries to keep as much of the detail as possible. So first you kind of the software analyzes the objects, and then it gives you the option to decimate them after they've been analyzed. Yeah, so now I'm decimating the bricks. And if you notice at the top, the amount of polygons have reduced. And I'm saving this out as a high version. This is what we'll use in XNormal to get our normal maps out and whatnot. And then what I'll do is I'll decimate it further, and I'll use that in Maya and use it as a base to create the low poly mesh from. Notice how the amount of polygons reduce drastically. Doing the same stuff for the mortar. And I think before I do the skull, I'll add some cracks to it. So yeah, I think here after adding the cracks, I'm trying to decimate it, but I'm not getting very good results. So then I just leave it at about 3 million polys and then just give it a, or just keep the one that I had originally. I'm not exactly sure what I did. Yeah, if you look at the decimation, the geometry of the fingers and the teeth weren't very good. So I'm exporting everything. I think I had saved the high poly ZBrush tool as well. And possibly now we're going to go to Maya. Yep. So I'm hiding all the geometry I had and importing my new geometry. Combine them into one object. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just start retopologizing. Okay, I selected shell over there so that it's going to ignore kind of the skull. So it's just going to give me the wall structure. So here I'm just trying different things. I thought maybe I'll do it that way, but I said no, there's no need to do it, so I'll just extrude it inwards. So I just extrude in and then moved stuff around, added more geometry, and then got all the geometry that I had and just kind of got rid of most of it, basically. And by turning the object into a snapping object, every time I add a line, it kind of snaps to the sculpt. So then when I can project stuff, there's already some kind of geometry that's going to support the normal maps. Here I'm just adjusting things around so that I get the points exactly where I want them. Okay, now I'm going to start getting rid of the ridiculous amount of geometry that I created. So as you can see, that is quite a difference from the geometry I had originally. So now I'm bringing the skeleton in. And what I'll do with the skeleton is I'll reduce the geometry using a Maya algorithm. So here I'm just deleting the parts that are never going to show. So basically every face that isn't going to show needs to be gone. So yeah, here I decided that it was going to be a lot easier to just reduce the amount of geometry and then delete the faces that I don't need. So basically at this point I just go through all the skeleton parts and reduce them as much as I can without losing too much of the shape. Okay, so now I'm exporting the new topology as one object, and I'm gonna just start messing around with hideous UVs to create, well, UVs. So yeah, first I figured maybe I'll do everything in Maya. But I think right at this point I'm realizing there's a much easier way of doing this. Exactly. And we're in hideous UVs, importing our object. And I'm just gonna start chopping and dropping all the different bits and pieces. Now with these UVs, I'm not being very careful. Ideally, you should be a bit more careful when you do these. But I knew that most of them are not going to be showing anywhere, especially in this part of the mouth, so I put seams over there and also this is not something that's going to be moving. It's kind of stuck in the wall and it's going to remain static over there, so you can hide things quite well. So basically the way hideous UVs works is you cut bits and pieces in your geometry, and then you can kind of stretch them out like it's an actual skin. You'll see how that works later on. So I'm trying to keep my seams on the inside of things. And I'm giving those cuts over there so that when I stretch it out, it's going to stretch more evenly. And yeah, these are the teeth, and I think I get so bored of doing these that I just skip to the fingers and then go back to them. I hope you don't end up brain dead after watching this. Okay, just the teeth left. Okay, so now I'm inside the 2D planes, and as you can see, this is how it stretches everything out. So it kind of attaches everything to a circle, pulls all the outside points, and then lets everything go, and they kind of shrink back into place. Obviously, because everything is triangulated and the UVs aren't done that well, there's going to be some kind of stretching and squeezing of faces. But as long as most of it is kind of greenish bluish, that's fine. So yeah, that's easier way of making UVs. Okay, here I'm just gonna try and pack everything up, but I'm not liking how it's distributing everything. So then I'll fix it in Maya. So that's done. I'm gonna put everything in a layer, hide it, add the new geometry, go into UV texture editor, and just mess around with geometry to allocate more space to the skull. because at the moment it's allocated the space according to the size of the model to the rest of the wall. Okay, exporting it again as an OBJ. And now we move into XNormal. I'm removing the previous meshes that I had, importing the new ones. So here I'm importing 3 meshes: the skeleton, the mortar, and the bricks. And then here I'm going to import the single mesh, the last one with the UVs. Over here I'm making sure that I get the kind of settings that I want, telling it where to save the files, and choosing what maps I want to create. Now, this creating these maps at 2048 resolution takes a long time. It took about 24 hours to render everything out. So it could be a good idea to kind of just render them out at a slower resolution, and then once you realize that everything is good, you just let them render out at high resolution when you're not in a hurry, basically, I guess. Okay, so here I've got the renders, and I'm putting them all in one Photoshop document, so I can start modifying them and creating the color maps and normal maps and anything else that I might need. Okay, here I'm modifying the UVs, so I can lay it over stuff and look at the UVs, even though I didn't use it much. And what I'll do is I'll get the ambient occlusion and basically just start layering colors on top of it. Or more than colors, textures. Okay, so now I got the layers that I need to create the color. And I'm going to go into my own library that I got from Google, and I'm going to start looking through concrete textures, and I think I don't find the kind of texture I want. So I just go into Google and search for a texture that is more suitable. I think I just use the first one out of the box straight away. Yep, that one. So this texture turned out to be tileable. So what I'm doing now is I am duplicating the texture and attaching them to each other. What happens by doing this is that the texture becomes very repetitive. So what I ultimately end up doing then is using the stamp tool to kind of mess around and remove some of that repetitivity, and then I'll use some grudge textures to kind of change everything. Right here I'm going into the grudge texture, putting the first one in, giving it a multiply and reducing the opacity, adding the second one, this one I gave it an overlay and reducing the opacity. So now I lost all the repetitiveness inside the texture. And now, sometime soon, I think. No, okay, now what I'm doing is I'm trying to select the creases in between the bricks so that I can add a kind of concrete-ish texture to it. So there's a bit of definition between materials. Okay, so I decided to choose this one. I'm kind of blending it in by using the eraser. Again, this is going to become a repetitive texture, but since it's just going to be inside the concrete areas, it won't be noticeable. Okay, I'm going to select the dark areas here from the height map. And yeah, my computer starts lagging down because I was recording this at the same time as well. So I'm just trying to close things until things start to work. And then ultimately I'll get a crash and I'll have to start this all over again. But you won't have to see through that. Okay, so here we've got the texture. I put it on the rock texture. And I want to fill in the area where the skull is. So I'm just going to... Oop, that looks like a mini crash. And basically I'm just getting all the colors and putting the ambient occlusion on top of them. And this is kind of the result that we get. This is the kind of curvature map, which I don't know exactly what I was trying to do over here. But ultimately I ended up throwing it away. Yeah, I didn't find any particularly good use for this, so just removed it. Here I think I'm adding a cavity map. And now I'm looking for the textures for the skull. So I found the bone texture. I even toyed around with the idea of me putting some patterns on the skull. But then I kind of ignored that completely and just chucked in the texture. And now here what I'm doing is I'm messing around with the ambient occlusion since I've got some artifacts inside the eyes. So at this point I'm just adding and deleting ambient occlusions from on top of each other and trying to find the result that I'm gonna like best. Here I'm seeing if I can do anything with that map, but I decided not to do anything. And that is our color. Our normal map is pretty much done. And now I'm going to create a specular map, because I want the bone to have a bit more specularity than the rocks. So here I'm just going through the different layers and turning them to black and white, messing around with the brightness. And once that's done, I'm just going to save everything and export them as PNGs, because ultimately I'll be inputting all this in Marmoset, so we'll get a kind of in-game view of what we just created. You guys can do this in Unity. Okay, so that is Marmoset. I'm going to import the meshes, or the mesh rather. So that is our mesh. Created a new material, assigned that, and I'm going to start by putting in the normal map, which, as you can see, the normal map does a lot. And then I'm just going to import the specular map. And then eventually the color map. And then I'll just mess around with the different settings to find the look that I want. As you can see, the skull is a bit too shiny. And here I'm just messing around with different settings and experimenting. When you see me clicking things, it doesn't necessarily mean I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm just clicking and seeing what happens, and then I move on from there. These are different HDRI environments, so you can get the kind of different looks from it. I think I decided to go with a castle theme, darkened it a lot, and then I added my own light to get some shadows and more depth, basically. So kind of, as you can see, we managed to insert a lot of detail with very, very little geometry. Here I'm just toying with the idea of creating a turntable, but it's not behaving properly at all. So I think I just mess around with it for a bit more, and then I just kind of just get some screenshots of it.